Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Ashenhall for another bit of Vampire Counts and against Brettonia gameplay. So, for my lord, I did decide to go with the venerable Vlad von Karstein, good old Vladdy Daddy. Now, Vlad is of course arguably the most survivable, or probably the most survivable of the Vampire Count Lords. The Karstein ring has been reworked. Back in the day, it was a huge single burst heal, sort of like what you'd have now with the Heart of Avalorn. Now, though, it's a 30-second, 90% damage resistance, which is pretty crazy and makes it much more useful, because before, with the Karstein ring, oftentimes you'd have already hit your healing cap and it was no longer useful. But now, 90% damage resistance, you will almost always find a situation where you can use it if it's a tight match. Of course, he also does have Master of Beguilement, and he does have a whole roster of skills and abilities. I did bring the Aura of Dark Grandeur, which is a nice -4 leadership debuff, and of course against Brettonia with a rather pitiful leadership, this could make a pretty significant difference. I also did bring Blood Drinker to get a constant source of regen, so Vlad is just going to be very, very tanky and very hard to kill. For spells, I did bring Invocation of the Heck, Raise Dead, and then everyone's favorite, Wind of Death, hoping to get a nice overcast and potentially wipe out the enemy front line, because in this situation, my front line is definitely fairly thin. Alongside Vladdy, I did bring 2 Necromancers. Both of them are equipped essentially the same. I did give each of them a Master of the Dead, which is an AoE regen trait, or basically just an AoE heal. And then I gave each of them a Forbidden Rod. Essentially, these guys are there to provide a battery of Winds of Magic for Vlad. Now, I also did throw Raise Dead on one of these Necromancers, simply to be able to get a few more charges of Raise Dead in there, and making them a little more useful that way. Then, finally, for what's kind of my hero squad here, I did also bring Corpse Guard with an Unholy Lodestone, which of course provides a further healing aura, which is pretty awesome. You can get a lot of healing with the Unholy Lodestone. And on top of that, you do get Vigor Mortis, which is +5 melee defense and +5 melee attack for all nearby units. So these 2 frontline Graveguard units are going to be getting buffed, and of course any other units that get in there will be buffed as well. Brettonia doesn't have the best of shooting, so generally you can protect the Corpse Guard, especially with the fact that I'll have 2 sources of zombie spam. My front line is composed entirely of Graveguard. Of course, Graveguard is one of the most cost-efficient units in the game. In my opinion, Graveguard is definitely one of the most effective, but for the price, one of the best infantry units in the entire game. There's no real contest. They have great melee defense. They have decent melee attack, which is boosted quite a bit thanks to bonus against infantry. They also have silver shields, 90 armor, decent HP pool. They're just a very, very solid all-around frontline tank unit. At only 750 gold, they'll trade effectively even with safe foot squires. For my backline, it's a bit of a mix. I do have the Dire Pack for some anti-large support, as well as just to dive into the enemy backline, applying even more pressure there. 2 units of Blood Knights to shut down enemy cavalry. Multiple Grail Knights have become kind of a norm almost for Brettonia, as far as I've seen. In many matchups, you will see multiple, maybe 2, 3 even units of Grail Knights. In these situations, the Blood Knights can be very, very powerful with their incredibly powerful stats. They of course do have Frenzy. They have weapon strength of 39 backed by 22 bonus against large monsters, charge bonus, all that sort of stuff. So these guys are very, very potent. And then I do have a Vargulf. I just wanted to give this guy really just a shot, because I haven't really tried the Vargulf out very much. It's a very, very mobile monster. As you can see, it has 80 speed. Its armor's pitiful though, but it does have regen. It's fairly tanky, and it's basically just it's an interesting unit. It's a very, very mobile single entity monster. Its weapon strength is definitely a little on the low side, but it does have pretty strong melee attack and melee defense and all that sort of stuff, so it's definitely decent, and I was definitely kind of looking forward to just try it out, perhaps get into the enemy backline, maybe shut down enemy caps, something like that. For my opponent's line, he did do a fairly, I think, conventional in most ways Brettonia lineup. He does have the Fey Enchantress, which is a little interesting. You don't see her all that often nowadays. She's, I don't think, that bad of a choice, but it's not something you're used to seeing anymore, ever since her Mist of the Lady got nerfed. She does, in this situation, have Earthblood as well as Regrowth, so going for pure healing. She does have Arcane Conduit, of course, Favor of the Fae, which is a crazy melee attack buff, and then Chalice of Potions, which is a cool bombardment spell that can do a lot of damage. It's essentially a free Comet of Cassadora that she gets 2 casts of. I do believe that back in the day it was 3 casts, so now she's a little weaker in that sense. For my opponent's frontline, he does have a whole bunch of Foot Squires backed by the obligatory Grail Relique. I'm not entirely sure how well Foot Squires trade with the Graveguard. I'm fairly sure it's pretty close, though. The 2 units will trade pretty tit for tat. Graveguard does have pretty solid weapon strength. Foot Squires don't have the best of armor, honestly, and Graveguard, of course, does have pretty monstrous melee defense, so that they can definitely. Despite not having armor piercing, the Graveguard could definitely kind of trade pretty tit for tat with Foot Squires, and they are, after all, a tiny bit more expensive as well. My opponent does have a very potent firing line, and mix of a whole bunch of peasant bowmen with fire, so I definitely need to be careful on my regening units, like the corpse cart and the Vargulf. And as you can see, I'm very paranoid here with the Vargulf, just keeping it back, also kind of using it to screen for the corpse cart a little bit. I'm also trying to keep the dire pack safe from the Pegasus Knights, so you can see my opponent's pushing into that right now. My opponent also does have some Spearmen at Arms here in the back. He does have these Pegasus Knights, which is crazy. You don't see these very often. Actually, Royal Pegasus Knights. So these guys are actually rather potent. They don't have a, armor piercing, which is probably their main weakness. They're not an armor piercing unit. Otherwise, they do have a slight bonus against large. They do have pretty good weapon strength, decent charge bonus. They of course do have the physical resistance, thanks to favor of the blessing of the lady. And they never tire. They've got great armor, decent armor rate at 80, bronze shields, very mobile. So they're an all-around decent unit. The Pegasus Knights are definitely not to be laughed at, and they're no laughing matter. They can definitely lay the smack down on some units. Finally, my opponent's really an interesting pick here, the Green Knight. Now, this is definitely a little bit of a surprise. Most likely, or perhaps my opponent was thinking that I might bring some ethereal units, or wanted to preempt that sort of stuff, because he didn't bring, but he does have magic attacks on the Royal Pegasus Knight, so I'm not entirely sure why the pick of the Green Knight, because Undead, of course, do have a reasonable selection of magic damage and like Lore of Death and all that sort of stuff. But the Green Knight definitely will cause me some trouble, because I myself in this situation did not bring any magical damage. I really didn't expect the Green Knight against me as Vlad. So in this situation, you can see the Royal Pegasus Knights actually got, they dove down quite a bit of damage to the die pack, but you can see the Royal Pegasus Knights are not really ideal for killing. They're an anti-large unit. They're not really ideal for fighting against heavy, against light, small units like the Royal Dire Pack. And the Dire Pack, they're actually traded pretty effectively. They trade down about 800 HP on the Royal Pegasus Knights, which is pretty crazy given that they are a much cheaper unit. They're barely more than a third of their cost. And as you can see, my opponent is being very careful here with the Pegasus Knights, knowing that it could be a problem. And I do actually surround the Green Knight, which is a huge mistake here. I do see the Comet of Casandor coming down. You can see a shotgun scatter everywhere. All my Blood Knights are getting clear last second. And so the bombardment only really hurts the Graveguard, though definitely by a pretty significant margin. In the meantime, the frontline engagement has begun. You can see Vlad is in the thick of things, chopping through foot squires left and right. Earthblood has gone down to get some healing, but at the same time, the Graveguard are just kind of hacking their way through the front. You can see, of course, the Graveguard over here are just going to chop through these Spearman arms very, very quickly. I do try to get into my opponent's backline with the Dire Pack, but get intercepted by Spear, so that's really not going to go well for me. But in the meantime, my opponent's front line is not doing the best. Over here, though, I'm going to lose the Corpse Cart with Unholy Lodestone. I was trying to get it through, but I did abandon it with the Blood Knights, and that means I'm not going to get the Corpse Cart in. That was definitely a big of a mistake on my part, but there's really not much I can do to shut down the Green Knight. I could have tried to surround him and bloody block him, but that's about it. So I do engage the Green Knight with the Vargulf, and the Vargulf actually is passive melee defense, so it's going to be hard for the Green Knight to really trade effectively or deal with the Vargulf quickly. In the meantime, here we do get a lovely rear charge into the Royal Pegasus Knights, who have charged into the back. So my opponent's front line is struggling a lot. You can see it's kind of buckling, and I do get a lovely rear charge. You can see I'm getting zombies onto my opponent's back line, which are now starting to kind of pressure these peasant bowmen and really kind of pressure them back. And in the meantime, the front line is going very, very well. You can see the Royal Pegasus Knights got pincered, they got sandwiched by the Blood Knights, and Blood Knights are just brutal. They're such a good anti-large unit, and they just absolutely annihilate these Pegasus Knights. These Pegasus Knights are down 6 models, 5-4, and now they are shattered, and that is going to be it for them. The poor buggers just didn't get much use. The other unit of Pegasus Knights did manage to kind of plow straight through and to defend the bowmen, and that does mean they will survive for a little longer. Now, one other cool little thing about the Blood Knights is they actually do have missile resistance built in as well. They, if you go over and look at them, they have the flag of Bloody Keep, so when they're not engaged in melee, they actually have 22% missile resistance. So a very cool little ability there. In the meantime, I do have some of my Blood Knights surrounding the Grail Relic, trying to take it offline, and that would allow me to really capitalize on my fear-causing units and just hopefully just destroy my opponent's front line. I'm not going to get a Wind of Death off by this point, is kind of what I'm figuring, so I decided to start casting various heals, and I'm definitely spending a lot of Winds of Magic just putting zombies up in the back line. I do drop some Skeleton Warriors in the back line, trying to wipe out these Peasant Bowmen. Peasant Bows have really bad melee stats, so they're actually pretty susceptible to zombies, much less Skeleton Warriors, actually. It's a little interesting, definitely a little funny. In the meantime, you can see I'm starting to cast Forbidden Rods just to try to get as much Winds of Magic as I can. You can see the pressure is definitely mounting. The front line is buckled for my opponent. You can see this poor Grail Relic is actually getting hit by the Dire Pack, and the Dire Pack is actually going to do pretty well. Grail Relic has really, really bad armor, and most of its survivability usually comes from the fact that it's a very small single entity, and so you can't get too much hits on it, but the Dire Pack, they're pretty good. Meantime, my opponent is going to get a bombardment in. I'm not really paying attention, so this Chalice of Potion is going to go down. You can see the Royal Pegasus Knights, once again, they got absolutely monkey stomped by a whole bunch of angry Blood Knights. The Blood Knights are just such a powerful unit. You can see the bombardment there. Doesn't do the best of damage, honestly. The Necromancer is popping the Forbidden Rod, but in turn I did get an Invocation to heck in, and that's just helping me a whole bunch. The backline is being pressured very heavily by a mix of Skeleton Warriors, zombies, and now even Graveguard and Blood Knights are really going to be able to kind of plow through. You can see the Spearmen really don't stand a chance. They're going to get terror routed, actually. I'm not entirely sure if... it's interesting. I guess this is close enough for the Vargulf to calls terror out. That's actually kind of fascinating. And I do throw, or I do send Vlad to kind of try to duel the Fey Enchantress, who is at this point one of the only remaining troops for my opponent. And things are definitely looking very grim. You can see the zombies over here. They're trotting along at their very slow, crawling pace, trying to keep up with the bowmen. They have no chance for that, but they can zone them away, and this is very cost efficient. 3 Winds of Magic used to zone away peasant bows with fire arrows. Definitely good. In the meantime, the Blood Knights do get into the peasant bowmen over here, the peasant bows with fire arrows. With no Grail really, these guys have terrible leadership. I do believe it's like 30 baseline or something. It's really, really pitiful. I actually want to check 36. It's absolutely atrocious, and you can see that my opponent's army does shatter. Now, I did request for my opponent. I did ask my opponent if he wanted to kind of fast forward here, but I got no response. Perhaps the chat is definitely. I do wish the chat was a little better designed in this game. It's often hard to kind of communicate. Like in some other games, you'll have the chat like in the bottom or something, but I guess they don't want it blocking. So regardless, this next minute is going to be me beating up on the Green Knight, because the Green Knight is of course unbreakable. So we got to kill him until he's dead, and so it's going to take a while. We got to fast forward through 50 seconds of basically just beating up on the Green Knight. I'm getting another Headcane. It's slow and tedious work. Most undead units don't have the best of melee stats. Obviously, my Blood Knights do have a bonus against large, so if they can get into the fray, they're going to start applying a lot of pressure. Honestly, I make a mistake here and just not pulling my Graveguard. I should have just pulled my Graveguard away and let the Blood Knights do all the work. It would have been much, much better. But yeah, as you can see, the Green Knight just topples over. I did lose some Necromancers, actually, and actually that came down purely to my own greed. I popped Forbidden Rods on them when they were already really crippled. You can see this guy over here died essentially to the Forbidden Rod. I actually do believe he died outright to the Forbidden Rod, so I definitely threw these Necromancers and as a sacrifice, but they were there to be a battery for Vlad. They weren't really there for anything else. Obviously they provided regen to the Graveguard, which was huge, and that was very useful, but mostly they were there just to provide Vlad with a source of wins. So, looking at the composition, I made a huge mistake in just kind of abandoning the Corpse Guard with the Unholy Lodestone. Now, to be honest, I didn't really have the best of tools to defend it. I could have, however, I was looking initially for Wind of Death, and what I should have done most likely instead is casted a zombie on top of the Corpse Guard. That would have blocked off the Green Knight, and the Corpse Guard would have probably been able to just thread its way through. The Green Knight doesn't have the best of mass, so a bunch of zombies would have been able to just tie him down and waste his time. As far as the infantry goes, the Graveguard performed absolutely wonderful. My opponent only had a front line of 3-foot squares, so he didn't have the best or most toughest of front lines. He was definitely investing a lot into the kind of supporting tools. He had all these spears. He had pheasant bows with fire arrows, which actually performed really, really well. Though, of course, I'm not entirely sure how many of these kills were against zombies or skeletons. But regardless, 65 and 47 is not a really terrible performance. So my opponent really kind of invested very, very heavily into this backline presence. He also did have the Green Knight and the Cavalry, which was something he really invested in. So his front line was definitely on the weaker side, and it meant that a quartet of Graveguard could really just kind of chew through his foot squires and then kind of get into the cookie jar and be a real pain. Vargolf didn't perform too well, but it did spend most of the game fighting the Green Knight, so I'm not entirely sure if it was good or bad. It definitely tied down the Green Knight for the entirety of the game, and the Vargolf is about a couple hundred gold cheaper. It's a decent unit in this situation. I think there just wasn't much of a target for the Vargolf, and I could have obviously tried to push it through to the back line, but then I would have been risking getting isolated and killed by the Pegasus Knights, and that would have been a problem. Blood Knights performed absolutely stellar work. I really like the Blood Knights in general. I know that in a lot of ways the meta's kind of shifted more towards Terrorgeist lately, because Terrorgeist of course got the breath attack and all that sort of stuff, but I've nonetheless been finding Blood Knights are still a very, very potent anti-large unit in their own right. And of course then we have Vladdy Daddy, who of course was spawning monsters on my opponent's backline and chopped up the Fey Enchantress and all that good stuff. As far as my opponent's build goes, I definitely think it was interesting the way he invested in Royal Pegasus Knights. It's not something you see every day. It was definitely, I think, a risky endeavor there. Personally, I think you're better off bringing the Grail Knights in general. The Grail Knights would have probably performed better in this sort of situation. And I also think the Green Knight is a bit of a questionable pick. Obviously, if you bring any sort of Grail unit, you already are going to have magic damage, so you don't really have to worry about getting a source of magic damage to deal with Karen Wraiths or Wraith units. I don't bother with Wraith units against Brettonia, because they do have such easy access to magical damage, and you'll almost always see at least one unit with magic damage, whether it be Grail Knights, Grail Guardians, or Royal Pegasus Knights. And of course, once we get our Regiments of Renown, then you're also going to see a lot more. You're going to see the fancy Regiment of Renown, Battle Pilgrims, of course, with magic damage. So, in general, it's just not a good idea, I think, to bring ethereal units against Brettonia. So, I thought it was an interesting pick to decide and bring the Green Knight. Obviously, I myself didn't really bring the tools to deal with it, and because of that, I suffered kind of heavily to the Green Knight. But It was okay. I think it's also worth noting that the Green Knight does not actually have the best of... The Green Knight does not actually have the best of physical resist. I do believe it's only 40%, or maybe like 60%. It's not the usual 80 or 75% of the other ethereal units. Nonetheless, good against my opponent Liao in this situation. Great game. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I do hope you guys enjoyed kind of seeing some undead action. And if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to post them in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching. I do hope you guys all had a great new year, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.